I made a mistake when I was 63. Not a small one. The kind that costs you sleep for months. The kind that makes you replay conversations in your head at 2 in the morning, wondering where the boy you raised went, and when exactly you started raising someone else instead. My son's name is Ethan. He is 36 years old. He has his mother's eyes, and, for most of his life, her kindness too. His mother passed when he was 22. A brain aneurysm that gave us no warning and no time to say the right things. After that, it was just the two of us. I worked harder. I saved more carefully. I told myself that everything I built, I was building for both of us. I spent 31 years as a general contractor in Charlotte, North Carolina. I did not inherit money. My father worked the docks in Wilmington and died at 59 with a bad back and a good name. What I have, I earned with my hands and with discipline. By the time I was 60, I had a modest house paid off, a reliable truck, and about $900,000 in savings and retirement accounts. Not a fortune by some measures, a fortune by mine. I want to say that clearly, because it matters to what comes next. I earned it. Every dollar. Ethan married a woman named Brianna 4 years ago. She is smart, well-dressed, and she comes from money. Her parents, Gerald and Patricia, own 3 commercial properties in Raleigh and a vacation home on the Outer Banks. They are the kind of people who mention their investments casually, the way other people mention the weather. At the rehearsal dinner, Gerald made a toast and said something about building legacies. He smiled at Ethan when he said it. I should have paid more attention to that smile. I liked Brianna at first. She was warm with Ethan, and she made him laugh in a way I had not seen since his mother was alive. I paid for the rehearsal dinner without being asked. I wrote a check for $20,000 as a wedding gift. I did not make an announcement about it. I handed it to Ethan the morning of the wedding while we were standing outside the church, and he hugged me and said, "Dad, you didn't have to." I told him that was the point. Gerald and Patricia gave them a china cabinet. That is not a metaphor. That is literally what they gave. A china cabinet, still in the box, from a home goods store. I did not say anything. I told myself it was not my business. I told myself that different families do things differently, and that what Ethan and Brianna built together was theirs to build. The first time Ethan asked me for money after the wedding, I said yes. They were having trouble covering a car repair and a dental bill at the same time, and I sent $3,000 without hesitation. I was glad to do it. That is what fathers do. The second time, it was $5,000 for a home office renovation because Brianna had started a consulting business and needed a professional space. I said yes again. Slower that time, but yes. Looking back, I think those 2 yeses were the most expensive decisions I ever made. Not because of the money, because of what they taught my son about the word no. About 18 months ago, Ethan called me on a Sunday morning. He had that particular tone in his voice, bright, a little rehearsed. The tone he used when he wanted something and had practiced asking for it. He told me he and Brianna had found a house. He wanted me to come see it with them that weekend. It was in a neighborhood called Prescott Ridge, which is the kind of name developers give to places that used to be pine forest. The house was beautiful. I will say that honestly. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a kitchen that looked like a magazine and probably cost like one too. The listing price was $1.1 million. I stood in the living room while Ethan walked me from room to room, narrating like a tour guide. High ceilings. Original hardwood. The primary suite has its own sitting room, Dad. Can you believe it? I could believe it. That was the problem. When we finished the tour, we stood on the back deck. It overlooked a yard that sloped down to a small creek. It really was a lovely property. I remember thinking that. I also remember doing math in my head quietly. Ethan earned about $95,000 a year as a regional sales manager. Brianna's consulting business was less than 2 years old and pulling in maybe $40,000, most of which she was reinvesting. Combined, they were bringing home roughly $110,000 after taxes. A $1.1 million home with a standard down payment would put their mortgage at somewhere around $6,000 a month. That was more than half their take-home pay before groceries, car payments, or the credit card statements I had caught glimpses of on their kitchen counter. I did not say any of this standing on the deck. I said the house was beautiful. Because it was. Ethan said, "So, Dad, what do you think?" I said I thought it was a lot of house. He nodded like I had agreed with him. Then he said, "That's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about." He pulled up a spreadsheet on his phone. I remember being slightly impressed and slightly alarmed at the same time. He had done the math. He had put it in a document. He had color-coded it. In green, at the top, was a line that said Dad's contribution, $250,000. I read it twice. He explained it calmly, the way someone explains something they have been rehearsing. If I contributed $250,000 toward the down payment, their mortgage would drop to a manageable number. They could do it. It would be an investment in their future. In his future. He was my only son. He knew I had savings. He was not asking me to drain myself. He just needed a bridge, he said. Just a bridge. I asked him when they had decided on this number. He said they had talked about it together. He and Brianna. I asked whether Gerald and Patricia were contributing. There was a pause that lasted about 3 seconds, which was long enough to tell me everything. He said they had not discussed it with them yet. He said he wanted to come to me first. I told him I needed to think about it. I spent the next 2 weeks thinking about it. I talked to no one. I sat with it the way you sit with something that does not have a clean answer. On one side, he was my son. I had the money. The gesture would be meaningful. On the other side was everything I had seen in the last 4 years. The 2 checks I had already written, the china cabinet from Gerald and Patricia, still probably in a box somewhere, the spreadsheet with my name already filled in. On a Tuesday evening, I called Ethan and told him I would not be contributing to the house purchase. The silence on his end lasted longer than 3 seconds that time. Then he said, "Dad," and the way he said it, just my title. Nothing else. I felt something shift. Not in the room. In him. I told him I loved him. I told him I wanted him to be happy. I told him that a house he could afford would make him happier in the long run than a house that required his father's retirement savings to exist. I told him that if he needed help in a genuine emergency, I would always be there. But this was not an emergency. This was a choice. He said, "You've told me before that everything you saved was for us." I said I had said that when his mother died, and I had meant it differently than he was using it. He said, "I'm your only family." I said, "That's exactly why I'm saying no." He hung up. I did not hear from him for 3 weeks. I told myself that was normal, that he needed time to be angry, and then he would come around. I had been 22 once. I had been disappointed by people I loved. I knew it passed, but Ethan was not 22. And what came in the mail 6 weeks later was not a phone call. It was a legal notice. I read it standing at my kitchen counter, still holding the rest of my mail. My son, Ethan James Whitmore, was filing a civil claim against me. The claim alleged that I had made repeated verbal promises to provide financial support toward his home purchase, that I had induced him and his wife to pursue a specific property based on those assurances, and that by withdrawing my commitment, I had caused quantifiable financial and emotional damages. The amount he was seeking was $480,000. $480,000. I set the notice down on the counter. I picked it up again. I read it again. I put it down. He had doubled the number. I want to tell you that I was furious. I was. But underneath the fury was something worse, something quieter, which was grief. Because you can be angry at a stranger who wrongs you. When your child wrongs you, there is no clean emotion available. You are angry and heartbroken at the same time, and the two feelings do not cancel each other out. They compound. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Her name was Donna Reyes, and she had been recommended to me by a neighbor whose business dispute she had handled 2 years earlier. Donna was direct and unhurried. She listened to everything, asked about a dozen questions I had not anticipated, and then sat back in her chair and said, "Tell me, every conversation you remember having with your son about money. Every one, word for word, as best you can." We spent 2 hours in that first meeting. By the end of it, Donna said the claim was aggressive, but not frivolous in a legal system sense. The allegation of verbal promise was unprovable on his end, but it would require me to demonstrate that no such promise existed. She said we would need documentation, written records, anything that showed the pattern of my giving as voluntary and conditional rather than committed. I had kept records. I had the canceled checks. I had text messages. I had an email I had sent Ethan 3 years ago, after the second check, where I had written clearly, "I'm happy to help when I can. Just don't count on me for the big stuff. That's yours to figure out." He had replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Donna read that email and said, "This is important." I asked her if I needed to be worried. She said, "You need to be prepared. I want to tell you about the 4 months between receiving that notice and the day we went to court. Because those 4 months were not just legal preparation. They were something else. I found out, through Donna, that Ethan and Brianna had gone ahead and purchased the house. Not the $1.1 million property, a different one, $850,000, in a neighborhood called Elm Creek. They had used a larger mortgage and a smaller down payment. They were stretching. I also found out that Gerald and Patricia had contributed $40,000 toward the purchase. Not nothing. But not the number that was supposed to have my name on it. I want to be precise here. I do not resent Gerald and Patricia. That is their money and their choice. What I resent is that the shortfall between what they gave and what Ethan wanted became my legal liability. What I resent is that my refusal to fund a decision I was not part of was reframed as a broken promise. There is a difference between choosing not to help and failing to deliver something you never agreed to deliver. My son did not seem to understand that difference. Or perhaps he understood it perfectly and was betting that a judge would not. The day of the hearing, I wore a navy suit I had bought for a friend's funeral 3 years earlier. I arrived early. Donna was already there. 2 yellow legal pads on the table in front of her. Ethan came in with Brianna and a lawyer I did not recognize, a younger man in a gray suit who looked like he had just passed the bar exam and was eager to demonstrate it. Ethan and I did not speak before the proceedings began. Brianna looked at the table. I looked at my son. He looked at the space just past my shoulder. His attorney made the opening argument. Verbal agreement. Reasonable reliance. Emotional investment based on stated intentions. He used the phrase actionable promissory estoppel twice, loudly, and as if volume would substitute for evidence. Donna presented the documentation. The checks, each one voluntary. The text messages. The email with the thumbs-up emoji. She was methodical and precise, and she never raised her voice once. Ethan testified. He described a series of conversations he said we had over several years, in which I allegedly told him that my savings existed for both of us, that he would never have to struggle the way I did, that I would always be there to help with the big things. He spoke with conviction. Some of it was true. Some of it was a careful rearrangement of true things into a shape they had not originally held. Then I took the stand. Donna asked me to describe my financial history in brief. I did. 31 years of contracting. No inheritance. A wife who died young. A son I raised alone for 14 years. The savings I had accumulated through discipline and sacrifice. She asked me whether I had ever promised Ethan $250,000 toward a home purchase. I said no. She asked me whether I had ever led him to believe such a promise existed. I said no. She asked me to characterize the nature of my previous financial gifts to my son. I said they were gifts, voluntary, given with love and no expectation of return, but also with no binding commitment to give again. Then the judge spoke. His name was the Honorable Carl Maddox, and he had the kind of face that does not give much away, the face of a man who has spent decades listening to people describe themselves as the wronged party and has learned to wait for something more than description. He looked at me over his reading glasses, and he asked me one question. He said, "Mr. Whitmore, in your own words, not legally, not financially, why did you say no to your son?" The courtroom was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when something that matters is about to be said. I took a breath. I had not prepared for this question. Donna had not prepared me for this question. I was on my own, I said, because I watched him become someone I didn't recognize, and I thought that saying yes one more time would finish the job. Judge Maddox looked at me for a moment. Then he wrote something down. He did not rule from the bench that day. We received his written decision 11 days later. The claim was dismissed in its entirety. In his written opinion, Judge Maddox noted that verbal expressions of parental support, absent specific terms, consideration, or written agreement, do not constitute enforceable promises under North Carolina contract law. He noted that the plaintiff's own documentation, the text messages, the email demonstrated that the defendant had been consistent and clear about the voluntary nature of his giving. He noted that promissory estoppel requires reasonable reliance, and that it is not reasonable for an adult child to rely on an expectation of a $250,000 gift based on generalized statements of parental affection. He also included one sentence that Donna underlined in the copy she sent me. It said, "The court observes that the most durable gift a parent can give a child is not financial. It is the expectation that the child will stand." I read that sentence 4 times. I want to tell you that everything resolved cleanly after that. That Ethan called me that evening and we talked for 2 hours and rebuilt in one conversation what had cracked over 4 years. That is not what happened. What happened was slower and quieter and, I think, more real. He did not call me for 2 months after the ruling. I did not call him. I will be honest about that. I was still too raw. I had sat in a courtroom and watched my son try to take almost $500,000 from me through a legal argument built on a misreading of the words "I love you." I needed time before I could hear his voice without that image between us. The call came on a Saturday in October. He said my name when I picked up, just my name, and his voice sounded like he was 19 again, like the voice I remembered from the year after his mother died, when he would call me from his college dorm at odd hours just to talk about nothing, because talking about nothing was the only way either of us could stay afloat. He said he was sorry. I did not say it was okay, because it was not okay. But I said I heard him. We talked for almost an hour. He told me things I had not known, that the first 2 years of the marriage had been harder than they looked, that Brianna's parents had expectations attached to their $40,000 that had created their own kind of pressure, that he had told himself the lawsuit was about principle when he knew, at some level, it was about fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of having less than he thought a man his age should have. He had looked at my savings and seen a solution, and he had been willing to dress that solution up in legal language rather than look honestly at what he was doing. He said, "I was turning into someone I didn't want to be." I said, "I know. That's why I said no." Another silence. But this one was different. The first silence, after I refused him the money, had been the silence of a door closing. This one was something else. The silence of a door that was still open, if both of us were willing to walk through it carefully. I told him that I was not going to change how I managed my money. I told him I had worked too hard for too long to allow guilt to make my financial decisions. I told him that if he and Brianna ever faced a genuine emergency, a job loss, a medical crisis, something that threatened their basic stability, I would be there. I told him that was different from funding a lifestyle that required my retirement savings to sustain itself. He said he understood that now. He said he should have understood it before. I told him that I believed he would make a good life, that I had always believed that my refusal was never a statement about his worth. It was a statement about what he was capable of, which I had always believed was more than he was giving himself credit for. He was quiet again. Then he said, "Can I come see you next weekend?" I said yes. He came on a Sunday. He came alone, which I appreciated. We sat on my back porch and drank coffee and watched 2 squirrels argue over the same patch of lawn for 20 minutes. We did not solve everything. We did not pretend the last year and a half had not happened. But we talked the way we used to talk, honestly, without agenda, without anything at stake except understanding each other. Before he left, he stood at his car and looked at me for a moment. He said, "Dad, do you think I'm going to be okay?" I said, "I think you're going to be more than okay, but only because you'll have earned it." He nodded. He got in his car. He drove away. I stood in my driveway for a while after his taillights disappeared around the corner. The evening was cool. The kind of October cool that smells like wood smoke and dry leaves, the kind of evening his mother used to love. I thought about her. I thought about whether she would have handled this differently. She was softer than me in certain ways, more instinctively generous. I think she might have given him the money. I also think she would have understood why I did not. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table where I had read the legal notice 8 months earlier. The table where I had set it down and picked it up and set it down again. The table where I had learned that love is not protection from consequence, that sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is refuse to protect his child from the consequences of his own choices. I did not feel victorious. I want to be clear about that. People have said to me since a few friends, a neighbor, my brother in Asheville, that I must have felt vindicated when the ruling came down. I did not feel vindicated. Vindication implies an adversary, and my son was never my adversary. He was my child who had lost his way, and the ruling was not a win. It was a door that forced him back toward a version of himself I recognized. What I felt, sitting at that kitchen table in October, was something closer to tired and something closer to grateful. Tired because it had cost a great deal, not financially, though the legal fees were considerable, but emotionally. Every hour in that conference room with Donna. Every night I lay awake running the numbers, not of the settlement, but of everything else. The years, the decisions, the moments where I might have drawn the line earlier and chose not to. Grateful because the door was still open, because he had walked back through it. I am 63 years old. I have outlived my wife. I have spent more nights alone than I care to count. I have learned, slowly and at some cost, the difference between what people need from you and what they want from you. I have learned that giving someone everything they ask for is not love. Sometimes it is the opposite of love. Sometimes it is a way of telling them, without words, that you do not believe they are capable of getting it themselves. My son is capable. I always knew that. I just needed him to know it too. He called me last week to tell me they had refinanced the mortgage at a better rate, that Brianna's business had landed a significant contract, that things were starting to feel more stable. He did not ask me for anything. He just called to tell me. I said that was good news. He said, "I'm figuring it out, Dad." I said, "I know you are." And I meant that the same way I meant it when I said no. With all of it. With everything.